The Israeli intelligence echelon is estimating with growing certainty that Muhammad Sinwar, the de facto leader of Hamas, has been assassinated by an Israeli airstrike in the Gaza Strip. This has the potential to unfreeze hostage negotiations, as Muhammad Sinwar had refused to back down from maximalist demands. Now, the leaders of Hamas outside of the Gaza Strip, who appear to be more flexible, might be able to push through something that Israel will be able to accept. The IDF strike on Tuesday morning on a Hamas base that was set up inside a hospital in Khan Yunis in the Gaza Strip, with Sinwar being the main target, apparently terminated this evil man. He is believed to have been in a tunnel underneath the hospital at the time of the strike, which included about 40 heavy munitions. This brings back memory of the strike that led to the elimination of Hezbollah leader in Lebanon, Hassan Nasrallah. We'll tell you about the golden intel which preceded this strike, as well as the speed at which the plan was put into motion. There was not even time to inform our American allies of this strike, as there was fear that Sinwar would only be in the location for a very short time, and the strike had to be launched before he could escape. This led to the strike taking place at the same time as President Trump was making a speech in Saudi Arabia, as well as rocket fire from the Gaza Strip into Israel followed this strike, causing no damage and no casualties. And speaking of President Donald Trump's visit to the region, TBN Israel senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will take us through what's happening in our neighborhood and report on the visit that everybody is talking about. President Trump landed in Saudi Arabia and signed several major trade deals and investment deals, while boldly declaring that he was also there to coordinate the end of the Gaza war. And meanwhile, there are reports of major changes in the conditions under which Saudi Arabia is willing to join the Abraham Accords, and Mati will tell us all about that. President Trump's next steps will be in Qatar and the UAE, where more details are expected to be announced. There is going to be another country where President Donald Trump will not be stopping in, but which will occupy a lot of this time during his visit, and that is Iran. And during his speech in Saudi Arabia, he urged Iran to embark on a new path and threatened that there will be an agreement or there will be maximum pressure. And he also repeated that Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. And speaking of maximum pressure, President Trump also announced the largest arms deal in history with Saudi Arabia, amid several other agreements which are estimated to reach around $600 billion of Saudi investments and purchases from the United States economy, including weapons and ammunition purchases which are valued at around $142 billion. As of Iran, it is already under very strict international economic and diplomatic sanctions and various other forms of pressure and isolation. It also faces considerable internal difficulties, and the regime itself faces a severe legitimacy crisis. But it can also point to some achievements, and the race for nuclear weapons is the linchpin which will determine its ultimate success or failure, with implications for the entire region and indeed the entire world. Another country that has reason to celebrate today is Syria, because President Trump announced that he is lifting the sanctions on that country in order to allow the rebuilding process to proceed after over a decade of destructive civil war. The sanctions were originally imposed during the period of the Assad regime, which is now deposed, and President Trump said, "We hope the new government succeeds in stabilizing the country and keeping the peace. Good luck, Syria." Across the country, people took to the streets to celebrate the lifting of sanctions and the hope of a new chapter in the relations between Syria and the United States. And finally, we'll tell you about some of the chilling testimony of freed Israeli-American hostage Idan Alexander, whose family offered words of thanks to President Donald Trump and his envoy Steve Witkoff but not to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his government. And that created some waves in Israel, and we'll tell you all about that. So guys, we have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what is happening in Israel on day 585 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shiite militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region that are taking their orders from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is the head of the axis of evil in the Middle East. And a moment before we start, I want to invite you to click the subscribe button if you haven't already. Why? Because thanks to you, we managed to spread the truth about what's happening in Israel, and each click gives us the ability to continue our work. So please, press the subscribe button and stay tuned to the truth so that you'll know how to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, this city behind me. The IDF has begun over the past 24 hours to work in a focused manner to increase the pressure on Hamas, the terrorist organization in Khan Yunis. This began with a strike on a Hamas base that was set up inside the European hospital in eastern Khan Yunis, with the strike's target being none other than Hamas leader Muhammad Sinwar. Like I said in the introduction, this is the brother of the former Hamas leader Yair Sinwar, who turned out to be a very able and competent leader. The hospital has long been considered to be a Hamas stronghold, housing some of the most senior Hamas operatives and deputies of Sinwar. This strike was intended to deal a severe blow to the Khan Yunis brigade, regarded as Hamas's toughest bastion and the one opposing the negotiations. A large number of Israeli Air Force aircrafts took part in the assassination attempt, dropping dozens of one-ton bombs on the compound beneath which lies the tunnel where Sinwar was located. Now let me tell you a little bit more about this evil man, Muhammad Sinwar, who was the de facto commander of Hamas's military force in the Gaza Strip. He also led the hardline faction inside Hamas forces based in Gaza against the Hamas forces outside the Gaza Strip. These factions were at odds on a number of issues, and I don't think that the leadership of Hamas in Qatar and Turkey will shed many tears over Sinwar's elimination. That is because, amongst other things, he and his henchmen are the significant factor that has been hindering progress in the hostage release talks. Because of this, the Shin Bet and the IDF understood there was no choice. This man had to be taken out. The Israeli intelligence clearly showed that Sinwar's men moved through the tunnels and the spaces of the Nasser hospital and the European hospital in eastern Khan Yunis, and the time had come to strike them down. Israel's security establishment had long waited for the moment an indication on Muhammad Sinwar's whereabouts would surface, as he has long been described by them as a wild card whose schedule and movements were very hard to predict. It took a great deal of effort by the combined forces of dozens of field agents, electronic warfare assets, and observation platforms to pin down his location. Once he was pinned down, the military echelon moved quickly to hit his location with maximum firepower to ensure that he was taken down. The volume of ordnance that the Air Force fired at this target makes it difficult to imagine that anyone who was in that target area, including the tunnels beneath the compound, could have survived. Even if Sinwar and his deputies survived the explosions, they would have been buried alive in the tunnels without oxygen, just as Nasrallah is believed to have been. It is important to understand that as part of the war effort, the Shin Bet and the military intelligence are extracting extensive details from the strip and building a broad intelligence infrastructure. In some cases, intelligence gathering is done at great risk to the lives of field agents. The ability to determine with high percentages of certainty that Sinwar was indeed in the tunnels, and on the other hand, that no hostages who might be harmed were with him, attests to the intelligence depth of the Shin Bet and the IDF and what they've built in the Gaza Strip during the months of this war. Because of this, we also know a lot about Muhammad Sinwar, who commanded Hamas's military wing, the Idan Alexander brigades in the Gaza Strip since the elimination of Muhammad Def, and after his brother Yair Sinwar was eliminated in Rafah, he also took part in managing other affairs in the Gaza Strip. And once again, this has allowed him to be a major obstacle in any negotiations between Israel and Hamas. And if he has been eliminated, there will be consequences for the talks, as it could strengthen elements in the Hamas leadership abroad who are ready to be more flexible in these negotiations. Israel did not update the United States before the assassination attempt on Muhammad Sinwar in Khan Yunis, and this is according to a source familiar with the details of this operation. He explained that the dramatic assassination arose from a fleeting opportunity, and therefore, in his words, there was no time to update the Americans, although they were aware that it was being carried out while President Donald Trump was speaking in Saudi Arabia. The Israeli decision to try and eliminate Muhammad Sinwar during the United States President's visit to the region, and while the Israeli delegation is already in Doha, Qatar, to conduct hostage release negotiations, may lead Hamas to halt the talks and slow down the discussions, even if only for a very short time, for a symbolic reason. But maybe not, as everyone is tired of this war and ready for it to be over. Moreover, in the longer term, the elimination of Muhammad Sinwar could lead to a dramatic shift in the dynamics of relations between Israel and Hamas, as well as other parties in this region, including Saudi Arabia, which is probably not sorry to hear the news about his termination. Muhammad Sinwar has always been one of the most extreme people at the top of Hamas, perhaps even the most extreme, even compared to his brother Yair Sinwar. He's one of those senior Hamas figures who initiated the October 7th massacre, but since then has undergone no moderation or desire for compromise. Quite the opposite. He would not hesitate to sacrifice tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people if that ensures the organization's survival in the Gaza Strip. However, Israel estimates that new figures promoted after the elimination of Muhammad Sinwar will not dare to take dramatic decisions such as dismantling Hamas's weapons, which is today the main obstacle in the negotiations on a permanent peace agreement or a ceasefire agreement between Israel and the Gaza Strip. However, the chances increase that Sinwar's successors will show more flexibility regarding a temporary ceasefire based on the Witkoff framework that is now being discussed in talks in Qatar. For that matter, Defense Minister Israel Katz issued a statement on Wednesday morning regarding the strikes on Sinwar, saying the Hamas terror organization continues to use hospitals and various humanitarian facilities in Gaza as shelter and terror headquarters, endangering the population and committing war crimes. We will not allow the Hamas terrorist organization to use hospitals and humanitarian facilities in Gaza as shelters, as terror headquarters, and other uses. We will pursue it and its leaders and strike it powerfully everywhere. He added, we will continue to act with force until all the war's objectives are achieved, the release of all the hostages and the defeat of Hamas. So guys, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development in the Gaza Strip, and we ask you to keep spreading the truth, share, and follow us. And most importantly, click the subscribe button if you haven't already, so you stay tuned to the truth in real time. In a moment, before we turn to TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst, Mati Shoshani, for a closer look at President Trump's historic visit to the Middle East, I want to tell you about something that we're working on to try and be a blessing to our country in this time of great trial. I also want to tell you how you can be part of it, because in the middle of everything that Israel been going through, one thing has really stood out: the way that people around the world have shown up, from the United States to Europe, to countries that we never expected, all over the world. The support has been powerful. People are praying, speaking out, giving, standing with us in ways that remind us that we're not alone. So to our friends around the world, we want you to know that your voice, your help, and your heart means more to us than you can imagine. Whether it's political support, humanitarian aid, or just standing with us in sharing the truth, you are part of this story. So here at TBN Israel, we're seeing it up close. You're helping us rebuild, restore, and hold on to hope. So thank you, truly. And if you're watching and want to be part of our efforts to rebuild Israel, go to tbn.org/rebuildisrael and let's keep standing together. Again, that's tbn.org/rebuildisrael. Now back to the news, and we're switching our focus to Iran. Iranian media reported on Sunday that there had been a series of powerful explosions at two sites. In Mashhad, the country's second largest city, a heavy smoke plume was seen following an explosion at a factory connected to the Revolutionary Guards. According to the Saudi site El Hadat, fires broke out across the city at the same time. Firefighting teams quickly reached the blaze scenes, and so far, no casualties have been reported. Another explosion has been reported in the industrial zone of the city of Qom, where according to the reports, 5 people were injured. A few hours later, during the night, another massive explosion occurred at the cardboard factory in Al-Boraz province, leading to widespread power outages in the area. Images show flames and thick smoke at the site. As of now, no information has been released regarding the casualties or the circumstances of the fire. In addition, media outlets affiliated with the Iranian opposition reported a fire at a power station in the city of Karaj after a 4.0 magnitude earthquake was felt in the area prior to the reports. What are we to make of all of these fires and explosions in Iran? We simply don't know, but one possibility is that there is an increase in the production of weapons, which leads to explosives, workers who are not well trained, and equipment that is old, worn out, and not well maintained will have a difficult time handling an increased volume of production, and accidents involving explosives have tendency to result in large explosions, fires, and other problems. And another possibility is sabotage, and the regime has many enemies both inside the country and also outside of Iran, or it might be a combination of these two things. And let's not forget that earthquakes happen frequently in Iran, and that might cause the accidents to happen as well. In any case, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to spread the truth. And as always, we invite you to be part of the team by sharing our videos on YouTube and following us on social media. And now, we turn to TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst, Mati Shoshani, who will cover all the details about the most talked about visit in the Middle East. The first stop of the United States president is Saudi Arabia, against the backdrop of the report that Riyadh's condition for civilian nuclear power has been dropped only within the framework of a normalization agreement with Israel, and a candid statement that the offer won't last forever. President Trump also opened the window for the Iranians during his visit to Saudi Arabia while announcing the largest arms deal in history, which was part of a massive strategic economic agreement signed by President Trump and Saudi Crown Prince Muhammad bin Salman. So, Mati, tell us what's going on.
President Trump is in the middle of his Middle Eastern rounds. But importantly, these rounds don't include a visit to Jerusalem at all, and we'll get to that in a second. He's just visited Saudi, and he's planned to also have very substantial conversations with the Qataris and the Emiratis. And on the table are several really, really big topics. And we need to understand what's happening in the Middle East to make sense of what President Trump is doing in the Middle East, why his first trip outside of the boundaries of the US, or his first official trip as president, is to this part of the world. The big headline here is financial deals. President Trump just signed a big deal with the Saudis, stating, I believe the number is $142 billion of weapons purchases from the Saudis of American equipment. This is one of the biggest weapon deals in history, and it includes an incredible amount of planes, trains, and everything in the middle of that. Just an incredible amount of weaponry, an incredible high level of weaponry that is being sold to the Saudis by the US over multiple years to come. When he opens his visit to this part of the world, President Trump makes a very, very bold speech, and in that speech, he outlines several of his goals in this visit. Amongst them are finishing the deal, or pressuring the Iranians to finish the deal with the US when it comes to them losing their nuclear abilities and moving away and on from that place. It's reshaping Israel's place when it comes to the Iranians, when it comes to the Hamas, and when it comes to the Palestinians, although that's less official. And of course, the big headline is finances and money. And that's really shaped this entire conversation from the weeks leading up to this moment and also during this visit. It's all been around the question of how the financial upside of this is going to look. The headlines here are incredible. We're talking about the Saudis cooperating with the Americans. We're talking about massive weapon purchases. We're talking about several other deals that have to do with oil trade and with other goods that are coming out of this region. All of them benefit the American government and the American people. And to President Trump and his administration, that is a huge win. But he's not leaving this conversation only on the question of money. There's also quite a discussion about what's going to happen with Iran. President Trump, together with his emissary to the Middle East and otherwise, Steve Witkoff, have said several times that the offer to the Iranians is not on the table indefinitely. In other words, the Iranians are going to be required and asked, not nicely if they don't cooperate, to change the way they're operating when it comes to their nuclear capabilities. This weekend, in just a few days, is expected to see round 4 of the Qatar negotiated conversations between the US and the Iranians. And the US has said very clearly, we're not going to allow the Iranians to enrich uranium. To which the Iranians have replied, this is of course their Foreign Minister Arakchi, they say clearly, well, we're not interested in what you have to say on that. That's a non-negotiable for us. And on that seemingly non-negotiable issue, they're going to have to negotiate. The US, of course, also reminds the Iranians that this discussion, this offer isn't on the table indefinitely. They're going to need to reach a discussion and a conclusion sometime soon, or there's going to be an automatic snapback later this fall. I believe it's in October. So all of that puts a lot of tension on the Iranians, and the fact that the Americans are moving at breakneck pace in signing deals and making allies and reshaping the geopolitics of this region shows the Iranians that they don't want to stay behind. Another interesting thing that happens is that while Trump is traveling to the Middle East, the US has very surprisingly removed all sanctions from Syria. Now, Syria, let me remind you, for the last multiple lifetimes, has been a pariah nation. It was a nation led by a vicious dictator, and before him his father, Bashar, and before him Hafez al-Assad, the Assad family. And just about a year ago, El-Julani, or Ashara as he's called now, took over with his organization, HTS. HTS is a terrorist-affiliated organization. They were part of the ISIS axis of power in this region previously. Anyway, the US deems it right to tell these people that they're no longer under sanctions, remove those sanctions, probably in a greater effort to bring Syria into an agreement that stabilizes the region. And that is something that both the Syrian government wants, that's something that the Americans want, something that Israel desperately wants, and of course every religious minority in this region, the Druze first and foremost, want to see that kind of agreement that reshapes the balance of powers when it relates to Syria. So again, the headline here is that the US removes the sanctions from the Syrian government, probably with an expectation of them signing a deal sometime soon, and more importantly, for them changing their route and not going back to being a terrorist-breeding nation. For Israel, that is, to a certain degree, a good thing, as long as they actually comply, because it stabilizes a region and stabilizes part of our northern border. Another big moving piece that has been shifted this last week or so is the Houthis in Yemen. President Trump, before he travels to this region, says in a very, very bold public statement, look, we've accepted the requests of the Houthis. They want a ceasefire. We'll give them a ceasefire. They fought well. We respect that, and so on and so forth. And the Houthis respond, we will not attack American targets, but we will continue to attack Israel. Now, let me just give you some numbers. There are very few American ships that actually travel by Bab el-Mandab, the straits by Yemen. The majority of ships that travel there, by the way, the majority of cargo ships around the world don't carry an American flag for taxation reasons and otherwise, so it's not actually that big of a number of ships that travel down that route. But they do say we will continue to attack Israel. Just this morning and yesterday and several times before that this last week, the Houthis have been firing ballistic missiles against Israel. So to say that there's been a win against the Houthis, I would call that a very bold and a very optimistic statement. Because if you've said you've beat a terrorist organization and they on a daily missile are firing ballistic missiles at your strategic ally in this region, that's not much of a win, I think, in any military or diplomatic book. Anyway, so we need to see where that falls. My sense is that the Houthi situation is tied into the Iranian situation. And then that all brings us to our local perspective. As I'm standing here today just outside of Jerusalem, we need to ask ourselves the question of where does this leave Israel? And Israel has been very clear about what it wants. It wants the Iranians not to have any nuclear capabilities. It wants the Houthis to stop firing missiles on us. It wants our ships to be able to travel through the world and trade to once again be able to come to Israel and to this part of the world through the Suez Canal. And the same desire exists in Egypt. They don't want any more of the Houthi attacks because it's killing their economy in the Suez Canal, because ships are routing around Africa instead of going through the Red Sea and then the Suez Canal. And overall, I think it's really important to track with what President Trump is doing and where he's going. Is this going to be another series of financial deals? Or are we going to see in the next day or so, maybe a couple days, a very dramatic announcement that has to do with the next phase of the Abraham Accord? Perhaps Saudi having some kind of substantial deal that includes their involvement in this region and a deal that has to do with Israel and the Palestinians. I'm not sure where this is going. I was expecting to already see this agreement take place beforehand, but nonetheless, it's very interesting. Anyway, if you haven't done it yet, pause, like, share, and subscribe to this video and help us get the word out to more people around the world. And now back to Yair Pinto.
Thank you very much, Mati, for bringing clarity to a very, very difficult situation. Now, we're switching our focus to Israel's northern arena because President Trump also gave Syrians something to celebrate on Tuesday. I'm talking, of course, about his announcement that he intends to renew diplomatic relations with the El-Julani regime in Damascus and lift the Assad regime-era economic sanctions. President Trump made these remarks ahead of a meeting with El-Julani. This is the first time that the United States president will meet with a Syrian leader since 2000, when Bill Clinton met with Hafez al-Assad in Geneva. The United States sanctions imposed on Syria when Bashar Assad was in power cut it off from the global economic system, harmed trade and foreign investment in the country, and hindered efforts to rebuild the war-torn country. The new regime has asked repeatedly over recent months for these sanctions to be lifted, claiming they were intended to punish the previous regime and now constitute a huge burden on citizens who did nothing to deserve them. That might be a valid point, but I will say that the new regime has also made some mistakes and has a lot to prove in order to earn long-term sanction relief. As a reminder, El-Julani led the rebel forces that overthrew Assad's regime in December of 2024, finally ended the civil war that broke out in 2011 and utterly destroyed the country. He has attempted to show a moderate face to the world in the months since, but he does not have full control over all the jihadist groups that make up his own coalition, and he himself has a history of involvement in some of the most dangerous terrorist groups in the planet, including ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So with all of this in mind, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to update you on every development on Israel's northern front. And now we turn to one of the most chilling testimonies from a released hostage. Idan Alexander, who was freed on Monday after 584 days in Hamas captivity in the Gaza Strip, he was kept part of the time shackled with a sack over his head. He said that the first days after he was kidnapped were hell for him personally, because the terrorists holding him abused him and subjected him to severe torture. This continued all through the time that he was being held in Gaza, and he returned to Israel suffering from flea bites all over his body and with bruises. Also, the bombardments of the IDF artillery and the airstrikes were also very frightening to him. On one occasion, part of the tunnel where he was being held collapsed, but he managed to escape and was unharmed. Yair Alexander, Idan's mother, said last night in a statement at the Idan hospital in Israel that Idan also spoke of hunger, water shortages, and appalling sanitary conditions. Every day that passed was like an eternity. Every minute, a struggle between hope and despair. But there was more to his captivity than torture and hardship. Idan was held by senior Hamas figures defined as an asset because he holds American citizenship and was updated fairly regularly on developments in this war. He also frequently watched his family in television and in interviews. On days when the fighting took place in the Gaza Strip, he ate rice, pita bread, and beans. But during the ceasefire days, the diet improved, and including lamb and beef. As he told Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he feels weak and needs time to recover. On Tuesday, he went up with his family to the hospital roof to soak up some sunlight and spoke to the media about his heavy concerns for those that are left behind in the Gaza Strip. This includes 58 hostages, of whom 20 are believed with high certainty to still be alive, while 3 others whose fate is uncertain. The rest are known to be deceased and murdered by Hamas in the Gaza Strip. From Steve Witkoff, the US envoy, Idan received a gift upon his release from captivity after Witkoff visited him in Idan hospital in Israel. Witkoff gave him the Star of David necklace of his late son Andrew, who died at the age of 22, which is the same age as Idan. Witkoff said that he had worn the necklace on his neck for more than 25 years, and now he wants Idan to wear it. Additionally, last night the White House published footage of the moments of the conversation between Trump and Idan Alexander from Riyadh after similar footage was released from Idan hospital, where, as noted, he met with Witkoff. Guys, here at TBN Israel, we will continue to pray for the rapid rehabilitation of this brave family, and we together need to keep spreading the truth of what's happening in Israel so that the rest of the world will know how to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Okay, so how do we pray for this situation? One thing will be praying for the hostages. Make it personal, find a photo, a name, and pray for that hostage to be released and to be encouraged in captivity in Gaza. Let's pray for the IDF soldiers that are now called up again to additional maneuvers in Gaza, that God will protect them and give them peace in their hearts. Let's pray for all the enemies of Israel, that they will have a change of heart and that they will start loving Israel instead of launching rockets at us. The most important thing that we can do is unite in prayer for the peace of Jerusalem, and together we will win this war because God is on our side and He's the one.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.